Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Jacob Shapiro podcast. I am Jacob Shapiro. Rob Larity joining us for our bi-weekly chats. Boy, it's been a week. Recording Tuesday, June 24th. This will probably come out, I would guess, Thursday. President Trump has announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. So I've got one more piece to send out via Substack. If you have not signed up for my Substack, please do so. And then I'll try and take a little bit of a break because I have been running nonstop here for the last 12 days. And you will probably be able to get that sense from the podcast itself, because I mean, we do some analysis of markets and especially of U.S. Japan relations. But the end of the podcast is basically Rob. Thank you, Rob, for being my therapist and letting me talk about sort of the initial reflections on what it's meant to be driving so hard analytically over the past couple of days, and ways to think for myself about how to maintain mental sanity. And if you guys can take notes from that, if it's helpful for you, I hope it's helpful for you too. So anyway, enough rambling from me. I hope you enjoy the episode. I hope that you've appreciated all the analysis. I'm taking a little bit of a break at the end of the week, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. But we'll be back at it with a vengeance next week, I'm sure. And if the ceasefire does not hold, I'll be back at it sooner than that. So take care of the people that you love. Cheers, and see you out there. All right, listeners, it is Tuesday, June 24th. It is 10:18 a.m. Central Time here in New Orleans. Unless something, I don't think we're going to cover things that are breaking here, but this will probably come out on our normal cadence. It won't come out in the next 24 hours. So if some things seem outdated, apologies. They probably will, because the Iran-Israel war, skirmish, whatever, ceasefire, it's all evolving quicker than we could possibly keep in mind. Rob, I know you said it's been going too fast for you to follow in depth. It's going too fast for me to follow in depth. The latest thing was getting asked what he thought about Israel and responding. I'm basically quoting him almost word for word here. He said that Israel and Iran don't know what the fuck they're doing, which that comment could be made for a lot of different people, President Trump, but I digress. Elsewhere in the world, Germany is floating a return to required conscription in their military because Friedrich Merz thinks that Germany needs the strongest military in Europe. Can't say I'm looking forward to that sequel as much as I'm looking forward to the Dune Messiah movie that was announced will be filming in 2 weeks. And Timothée Chalamet, if you're listening, want you on the podcast. I've been tweeting at you all week. You haven't responded to me. You're starting to hurt my feelings here. We really want you on. I think we could do some good work together. Some drama over U.S. Japanese relations. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about some NATO things and anything else. But Rob, I've been looking forward to chatting with you because during these moments of crisis, I don't really have time to do much besides put my head down and try and pump stuff out as much as possible. And honestly, I want to be embraced by the sweet caress of the bosom of markets, that beautiful objective thing that is not blowing anything up, that is just responding with numbers. I just want to stare at the matrix for a good hour because I'm exhausted. I haven't been following markets that closely, and you haven't been following the war that closely because we're both sort of in our foxholes. So as I peek my head out of the foxhole, now that we have peace in our time, or at least peace this week, any market thoughts from you? I saw that oil did a massive collapse of, what was it, 10% a couple hours before the ceasefire was announced. So somehow the oil markets knew before everybody else. But just curious if there's any other market action that you saw that was fundamentally interesting or told you anything interesting, or if it was really the market was just okay, Israel and Iran are pummeling each other. That's cool. There are no Iranian companies in the S&P 500, so it's interesting that the Strait of Hormuz gets blocked. Okay, but not a whole lot else. So let's go into markets a bit. I could use a boring, objective sense of what's going on with the numbers right now. Not boring, you know what I mean.
Well, thankfully for people who are sort of in the whirlwind of events, the truth is pretty boring. So it's sort of one of those dog in the nighttime not barking situations where markets haven't really done much. And there is some signal in that. The fact that gold did not make a new high, the fact that Bitcoin, which had been acting very gold-like recently, actually sold off on these events and is, sort of in the middle of its near-term training range. All of this suggests that either markets had sort of priced in a lot of this potential geopolitical volatility, or they just don't view it as anything fundamentally relevant to the big gears. And That's the way I would think about this. Is like in this multipolar world, there are the gears, the individual areas where within each of those big and important things do happen, and we can see this, in markets because that is what's reflected in markets. When something happens in the White House relevant to fiscal policy in the U.S., that is moving gold and it's moving Bitcoin and moving these assets and bond yields. But the frontier regions, we haven't seen much market response to that. So I don't know exactly what to make of that, other than I think these places are viewed as sort of marginal to the really important piece.
Mm-hmm. Um, and maybe it's more important to think about I mean, like, this is going to give people whiplash, but the tariff delay is coming up, or the end of the tariff delay is coming up. Like, we had the Liberation Day tariffs, then we had the delay around April 10th. So technically, July 14th is when all of the Liberation Day tariffs sort of come back on, and I feel like you can sort of feel the market, or at least, I sort of have in the back of my mind, as Israel and Iran are pummeling each other, that where are the trade deals? Like, are the tariffs coming? Are the tariffs going to be back on? Is it just going to be another extension? Do you think that the market is like just expecting Trump to kick the can down the road again, and that maybe if if somebody asks him a taco question on the wrong morning, like maybe he'll like try and shake things up a little bit? Or is there anything on the horizon that you're particularly worried about coming up? Because I mean, we do have some cliffs that seem to be coming up.
Yeah, and I hate to be Mr. Boring on this call, but I'm not clever enough to say what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know anyone who is. As you point out, you'd have to be eating breakfast with Donald Trump to know what he's going to do when this delay is over. And even if you eat breakfast with him, whoever gets up right after breakfast is going to have, a totally different story.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like leaving entertainment value aside, what are we doing here? How do we think about this from actually taking action? And it's really getting back to this notion of uncertainty and what effects have already happened. And I can tell you that the effects that have already happened is we've seen a massive whiplash in the inventory cycle. So companies are struggling to figure out what the hell is going on. Um, and that uncertainty obviously hasn't gone away because you've had this moratorium, and uh, the deadline is coming up and no one knows. So um, on this kind of constant refrain of the only certainty is uncertainty, I mean, that's still in play, and it's it's emphasized more now in light of this recent conflict. Um, Supply chain managers all over the world, even if it's unlikely that the Strait of Hormuz would have been closed, everyone has had to scramble and figure out, what do we do if X, Y, and Z scenarios should happen. So the way to think of this is sort of an absorption of mental capacity uh, by people who have to make decisions. And that's bad because we're already straining that with everything that's gone on in the last 6 months, and all the data that's showing that sort of, investment demand leading indicators are weakening. Residential investment has been not good. Commercial investment has been really coming off the boil. The programs, ARPA and the um, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act programs are sort of, one of them is completely through the pipe and the other one is really getting through the pipe. So those tailwinds are weakening. Um, and you just add all this on top of everything else. It's not a great environment, um, especially when you take into account sort of the AI situation really having been this huge tailwind. And now, where's it going to go? I mean, recent data points have been bullish again, but the risk reward is not great. You have Larry Ellison coming out last week and saying, we are going to own and operate more cloud infrastructure than all of our hyperscaler competitors combined. Like, does
Mm-hmm.
that sound like a comment that someone says at the top of the cycle or at the bottom of the cycle? Like, you get data points like that coming through, but all told, you know, it's a time to be cautious and to pick your spots wisely. And that hasn't really changed.
Did you see your boy Paul Tudor Jones's kind of out there comments? Well, maybe they're not out there. His comments on artificial intelligence. He said, let me get the quote in front of me. there's a 10% chance in the next 20 years that AI will destroy 50% of humanity. That was his quote. Uh, he also, by the way, is saying he thinks that that President Trump is not going to de-escalate trade tensions with China at all, and that that markets are in for sort of a rude awakening about U.S. China ties. I'm not quite sure I agree with that so much, but I know you like him. I also wanted to ask because I feel like everybody before the war started was talking about this, and I was arguing with Marco about this. Every time I did an interview this week, even on Israel Iran, I would get this question towards the end of the interview about the one big beautiful bill and spending, but also specifically about the deficit and about the debt. And I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but I don't think we've framed it in quite the way I'm about to frame it to you, which is I keep on getting the question from people who are trying to read positivity into the one big beautiful bill saying, look, like spending is actually not going to be that much. Like they started with 10, they were going to add 10 to 15 trillion. They're really just going to add a couple of trillion and they're starting to cut entitlements. And isn't this a sign that actually this is the last gasp of populism, but there's going to have to be fiscal conservatism from here, and that's going to affect everything from the dollar to treasury yields, things like that. That doesn't ring true. It hasn't rung true for me. I keep on saying like, okay, like you're still talking about adding trillions, and if you look at the breakdown of when spending is happening, like there's going to be increases in spending up until the end of Trump's second term, and all the decreases are supposed to happen after he leaves. And the next president's just going to be like, yeah, sure, I'm going to inherit a plan from Trump and follow that to a T and not spend money to make my constituents happy. But I do kind of feel like when we're thinking about, I keep on going back to this metaphor too of the United States today as sort of where the United Kingdom was in the late 1700s. Not quite as dire. It's not like the United States has lost the equivalent of the 13 colonies in a failed war. And it's not like there's a Napoleonic empire that's rising on the continent that's directly threatening. But I like the comparison because it does seem like the UK was over its skis a little bit and overconfident. And UK debt was starting to get, I think, upwards of 200% of GDP at that moment. And it really metabolized that over the course of the next century after beating Napoleon and colonizing India and things like that. So that's a really long-winded way of winding up to how do you approach when I'm on my next interview and somebody says, well, don't you think that the one big beautiful bill is actually more fiscally conservative than markets were expecting and that maybe we've turned a corner on the debt, and how do you work that into some of the things that we're talking about here?
Um, to start with the UK comparison, I think this is really appropriate and it gets into the question that you asked, which is, I think the UK was fundamentally different than the US is today in the sense that the UK was run by hard money elites. And you know that because after they defeated Napoleon, the next 20 years were absolutely miserable in the UK because they ran a deflationary, like a fiscal deflationary policy to back the pound and get it back in terms of gold backing to where it needed to be. And they just absolutely bit the bullet in terms of growth, recession. It was a miserable time, and the only reason they could do that was because the people who controlled the power were the elites who had a vested interest in that. The U.S. is not in that situation today. The elites are not effectively debtors. Some of them are, but most elites own mostly equity. And the incentives are different, and they don't have the power. Like as much as you like to think like, oh, the rich run everything, like they really don't. And you can see this at the ballot box. There's not a popular mandate to go out and cut spending and balance the budget because there's not been pain. Like, yes, we had some inflationary pain in the last few years, which we haven't experienced for a very long time. It hasn't really been about runaway budget deficits and inflation because of that. Like that's something that's more nascent. So without that incentive, it's hard to see why, okay, like some moving around deck chairs on the Titanic of the one big beautiful bill or whatever. Without a change in those incentives, I don't think I would ever take this side of the argument that, oh, we're moving into fiscal rectitude. Like, why? Why would anyone who's a self-respecting politician do that in this environment? You're not going to be rewarded for it. And if you try it, you will be booted out. We were looking, I did some work on Japan just to catch up of what's going on. And I was reading and looking at what happened in 2010 when the DPJ finally came into power for the first time, ever. And they came into power on a fiscal conservatism policy. And the leader of the DPJ at the time said, "We don't want to become Greece. We're going to raise taxes and balance the budget." You know how long they were in power, and for a lot of reasons. But the point is, even when it looks like to smart people, oh, like this is a runaway deficit. These are like interest payment levels that are ballooning and gobbling up X percentage of our budget. Um, until you get that feet on the ground pain coming out of that, like historically, you just don't see people stepping in to fix it unless you have an elite driven society where people are taking a far reaching sort of approach to this and they have the incentives to protect the currency because they have a stake in that currency. And you just don't have any of that today.
Yeah. Why don't we back into Japan a little bit, because I think that's also a good place to think about what's going on, and also because this is, I mean, I won't say the media isn't covering it. I actually think the media has done an okay job here, but it's not like anybody has the attention to go to like some of the more boring things that are happening in the world when you've got all this kinetic action happening. But we've been talking about it now for a while, which is that there are problems in the U.S. Japan relationship. Like before the war started, remember that the United States was making progress with China in London over trade negotiations. They were making no progress with Japan. They've had 5 different consultations with Japan, and the Japanese officials have basically said they're nowhere close to any common ground. There was that Wall Street Journal report that you had multiple U.S. officials literally disagreeing with each other in front of a Japanese trade delegation, so that the Japanese aren't even really clear what the United States wants. And apparently, that's not just related to trade. So there was supposed to be a 2+2 meeting. So that's meetings of top, the defense secretary and the Secretary of State in the United States, foreign minister in Japan. So a 2+2 arrangement, and that meeting was abruptly canceled. It was supposed to be July 1st. The Japanese canceled it. You had Financial Times reporting that at least some of that was because the United States made a new demand about how much defense spending as a percent of GDP Japan needed to do, asking Japan to hike it to 3.5% of GDP at least. That, though, apparently was something that Elbridge Colby, who's at the Defense Department, was pushing, where it wasn't what Rubio was pushing, it wasn't what Hegseth was pushing. So again, the Japanese are like, we don't know what you want. Like, you keep on giving us mixed signals. So they canceled that. And then there's a NATO summit coming up, and President Trump had been looking for Japan, Australia, New Zealand, maybe South Korea to attend, maybe on the sidelines. You can feel the U.S. establishment trying to make NATO from just an anti-Soviet alliance, which doesn't really work anymore because the Soviet Union's gone, into maybe an anti-China alliance. And Prime Minister Ishiba abruptly said, "I'm not going to come. I'm going to send somebody else in my place, but I'm not really going to be there." And you could say maybe that's nothing. The foreign ministry in Tokyo cited various circumstances, which, I don't know. To me, that's Japanese diplomatic speak for "go fuck yourself." Like, we're not going to do this. But maybe I'm reading too much into it. But this is arguably like the U.S.'s closest ally in Asia. It's a country that is completely dependent. Well, I won't say completely dependent, but highly dependent on the United States in its security relationship. Has a lot of different trade linkages with the United States that it can't afford to deal with. And yet it's made little to no progress on trade. The security relationship looks like it's unraveling. Prime Minister Ishiba looks like he doesn't want to do anything with President Trump. And certainly, to paraphrase Dave Chappelle's old joke, I mean, Japan didn't even send PlayStations for this attack on Iran. They basically didn't say anything at all. Juxtapose that with the UK, which was trying to get out there and show that maybe they'd be willing to help. So that's the lead in to just say, as all these things are happening, like, we've got like real flashing yellow or red signals between the United States and one of its closest allies. So what direction do you want to take that, Rob?
I think Japan is one of the most interesting places in the world right now. And I think that even more after having spent a day or two really thinking about this and brushing up on what's going on. And I want to kind of explore an early thesis that could end up being kind of stupid, but it's also kind of provocative. So I was really boring before, so I'll be a little more out there here. But I agree. The signals between Japan and the US seem to be more than just the normal noise. It seems to be some kind of fundamental shift maybe taking place in terms of the relationship between the two. And this is something we've talked about, for the last 4 or 5 years, like ever since we started talking to each other. This was one of our big things we were watching. And when I look at the numbers in Japan, the thing that really jumps out to me is that Japan's outward investment, not portfolio investment, but fixed uh, capital investment, so FDI, has absolutely exploded in the last 5 or 6 years. Absolutely exploded. I mean, if you look in 2015, Japan had 150 trillion yen of outward investment. It's like 1.5 trillion US dollars. If you were to look today, that's more than doubled in that time. So uh, the visual image here is just a giant fire hose of capital leaving Japan to build factories and facilities. And I did some work on this. I mean, a lot of this is going into the US with the battery supply chains and things like that. But a lot of it is also going into Southeast Asia. And the numbers that I saw suggested that Japan's outward investment into Thailand and India in the last few years has each exceeded its outward investment into China, um, which I find really, really interesting because, like, here comes the controversial part. Like, whenever Japan has felt threatened by the United States, I mean, the last time this happened, if we just rewind the history books, it turned to Southeast Asian colonies essentially to overcome its lack of what it has at home, which is people and energy and food. And if you look, like, really behind the boring numbers that I'm citing, this looks to me like a very similar kind of response. And it's not top down driven, I don't think. Like, I don't know enough about what's going on. I haven't dug into this from a policy standpoint to see how intertwined the actual LDP is with businesses that are doing this. But in any event, Japanese businesses are responding to what's going on with gusto, and this is accelerating. Like, this isn't just a long term trend, this is going exponential. So the upshot is, like, everyone always talks about how Japan's GDP isn't grown, right? So in 2015, Japan had 4.4 trillion of GDP in US dollars. Fast forward to 23, it was 4.2 trillion. So in 8 years, GDP went down a little bit, according to these numbers, and all in US dollars. GNP, which is national product. So remember, no one ever pays attention to GNP because unless you're looking at a weird country like Ireland, it's always pretty close. But that's not the case with Japan, and it's increasingly diverging in a huge way. So GNP in 15 was 5.4 trillion. So it's 5.4 against 4.4. Today, while GDP has gone down a little bit, GNP has gone from 5.4 to 6.6. So you've seen over, roughly 20% growth in Japan's national products. So this includes the stuff that Japanese companies are producing not on Japanese soil in that 8-year period. And that is a completely different story than the common narrative of Japanese stagnation. Japan is stagnating in GDP terms, however you want to define that, purely on the domestic front. But this is a really interesting element. And I haven't dug too deep into this, but if you start teasing out the amount of income that those assets are now throwing off, it's an extraordinary amount of foreign currency based earnings, and how that plays into sort of the balance sheet setup, how Japan might intervene into the yen, or you might have these compiling effects where if the yen begins to strengthen, that could be a self-reinforcing sort of process because you have this huge, net positive international position. There's a lot to tease out here, but that's my sort of initial fun way to think about it is like, is this the Japanese empire just much nicer and not, not with all the slavery and stuff?
Yeah, without all the slavery and stuff. It was. By the way, go back and if you go back and read the history of what Japan was doing even before like World War II, like what Japan did on the Korean Peninsula in the 1920s, and I mean it's yeah, it's terrible. There are apologists for it, in the same way that Neil Ferguson is an apologist for the British Empire. And by the way, like I mean, he has some points. Like the British Empire brought civilization and education and lots of public sanitation, lots of different things that were like really good, but like at the cost of you need to give up like central parts of your identity. Like the Japanese literally thought of the Koreans as like lesser evolved forms of Japanese people. So they just needed to like evolve really quickly into the Japanese people that they could become. So that meant, you don't get to speak the Korean language and you need to be taught like basics of modern. So anyway, I'm going off there. So I mean, this is an impossible question to ask. You're probably just going to throw it back at me. But I mean, do you think there'd be problems in the U.S. Japan relationship, even if Trump hadn't been elected and we were seeing some of these things? I mean, the Biden administration was not for that. I'm forgetting the steel company's name, but remember they were making a big stink about Japanese steel company not acquiring U.S. steel for national security reasons, and Japan was like, "You're supposed to be the liberal internationalist one. Like, what are you talking about? You're worried about not getting your steel from us." So I just wonder if maybe some of this U.S. Japan tension was already baked in, and maybe Trump is like accelerating it or making it a little more bare. And I think Ishiba's personality and his success so far has something to do with that too. But yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
it
I like
probably I think
yeah,
it
go
probably
ahead.
accelerates it, but this was going on first. It really started to accelerate during Trump won, and
Mhm.
maybe that was a key factor. But I mean, my instinct is to say that this is largely bottom up economic logic at work. That you have Japanese companies that have been historically sitting on a ton of capital without a strong incentive to invest it. And something has switched in that incentive structure where now you're seeing really strong growth and investment, even though they've determined that they can't or don't want to locate that in Japan, whether that's because the workers aren't available, whether that's because domestic policies just aren't favorable, whatever it is. I think it's probably mostly that, just kind of seeing the opportunity, seeing in some sense kind of the all clear to come do this and take advantage of it in a way that wasn't there before. Um, Maybe it's a rising confidence by Japanese companies. I don't know exactly, and that's an area that I think we have to really think about more carefully and do some additional research. But I think the two things combine that fear is a great accelerant, but fear and greed together are always going to be much more powerful.
I think some of the lessons too from a lot of the recent conflicts that we've seen in the last 6 months, whether it's Ukraine's drone assault on Russian strategic air assets, or whether it's Israel bombing Iran, even aspects of the India-Pakistan war. Like one of the reasons people are not afraid of Japan is they think of Japan as this, graying population, super old, demographics are against it. There's no way they're going to be able to project force across all of East Asia. Well, I don't know. We're seeing that if you've got superior technology and a superior level of industrial expertise and things like that, that maybe you can punch greatly above your weight. So if Israel can do it just did to Iran. I don't think Japan is going to resort to this, and there would have to be a similar cultural sea change in how they're approaching things if they were going to have the stick to back up the carrot. But I think we do have to reassess some of our assumptions about what is possible from a security standpoint, because Japan has plenty of resources if it really wanted to engage in the type of modern strategic warfare that we're seeing, really, I mean, all across Eurasia right now.
Or put another way, now when Japan sends PlayStations, they could be have wings and be packed with high explosive.
Seriously, we shouldn't joke so much about that.
No, but just to follow on what you just said, like I think that's a good way to think of it. Is like there's lots of different forms of capital that a nation has. There's human capital, which is obvious. There's financial capital. There's physical capital, but then there's also kind of intellectual capital. And I think just on the economic side, like what we're seeing is Japan has this enormous base of intellectual and intangible capital that it's built up over the last 75 years. And if you can plug in human capital from other nations that have it, that's a very powerful engine. Um, when you're talking about just technology or business organizations and how they work and how they're run, process oriented sort of innovation. Um, Japan punches well above its weight. So if you're sitting there thinking about like, oh, their power correlates with how many human beings were they, like, I think that's the right way to think about it. Is that whole paradigm is out of date?
Yeah, and I mean Japan has been a sort of small c conservative country for decades and has really been happy to exist as a wealthy cog within the US led international order. So if that order really is gone, and gosh, it feels like every single week like more aspects of it are disappearing. Um yeah, and Japan is not used to having its own sort of independent foreign policy. It's been a long time since they had to think of these things independently, but I mean, like that's why these meeting cancellations stick out to me so much because it's not just anger about trade frustration. It's like, no, 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 like we're not going to meet with you if you're going to treat us like this, and we're not going to show up just for the NATO call, just because you say that you want us there for some of these different things.
It's kind of interesting just going back to this notion of being accountable to an electorate. Like, I would have to go back and check, but my guess would be that some majority in Japan was always like fairly skeptical of the US relationship, at least going back in more recent times. But Japan, obviously was always very, very tight with us regardless. And now, um, again, I'm quoting from Tobias Harris's Substack, which is very good, and I would definitely recommend it. Jacob and I are both subscribers. Um, he was quoting some of the latest poll figures in there and just calling out the fact that, I mean, there's overwhelming majorities of Japanese that do not want Japan to give in to the US on this and do not want Japan to follow the US lead in terms of security policy and trade and all of these issues that are up to grabs. And, Ishiba, one of the things about having a weak government, which like right now it's very, very weak, is you ignore that and you're at your peril.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's sort of the last thing that we'll talk about today. So we got some Japan, we got some market talk. Um, I do just want to kind of take a step back and let the listeners inside the Wizard of Oz contraption here with you and me, because you and I have not caught up really since the war started in any meaningful sense. I mean, we had an investment committee call last week, and we batted around very roughly the notion of, hey, there are these islands of stability in the world in Latin America, maybe even Southeast Asia, but the Eurasian landmass is well, it seems like on fire in all these different parts. Cousin Marco said on our other podcast there that, oh, but you have these garrison states like Ukraine and Israel and Saudi Arabia that can do well, and it's like, okay, like that's cool. I think I'd rather be in Latin America or Singapore watching all this from afar rather than having my capital in the garrison state. But maybe people have a higher risk tolerance. But the other thing, and I've never actually said these words to myself, but they really crystallized this week because I kept on getting this question over and over again, like, so how do you trade the war? Like, what are you guys doing to trade the war? And it's not a cop out. It's just to say, like, I don't think you can trade geopolitics. Like, maybe there are some asymmetric, low probability but high impact scenarios that we could create like a very niche strategy around. And you and I keep that grab bag of black swan events in our knowledge platform. Like EMPs and solar storms, I know is one of your favorites, and like and maybe we create like some really weird positions that you hold for the long term, thinking you're going to get explosive growth there. But I think that the question about trading and the way that the financial media has to link everything, every market move, back to something that is happening in the world, um, it just doesn't give you actually any real insight. And I think it's more about like, yes, you have to follow all these things in real time because maybe a nuke would have gone off or maybe they would have blocked the Strait of Hormuz, but it was never that likely that was what was going to happen. And even as the fire has been put out now, or at least there is a ceasefire, like all these tectonic plates that are shifting beneath us, they're shifting and they shift slowly. Like it's not like something is going to happen and you're going to get a 30% jump in your portfolio and then you're off to the races. But I do think we really need to be on top of like how these plates are shifting and what directions they go and things like that. So I don't know, I'm playing around with the metaphors there, but what do you think are some lessons for people from the war itself, and honestly from the first 6 months of what feels like a year that has just not let up so far. And I don't think it's going to change. Like, I don't think we're going towards like a peaceful, more normal cadence. I think this is just how it is. So I think we need some strategies for the listeners, for besides listening to you and me talk about this soberly and invoking, Cromwellian metaphors. Like, how are ways that we're thinking about this, or how should people digest this information?
I really liked the phrase that Sune Sorensen used in our investment committee when we were talking about this, and he said, "Change is a process, not an event." And I think that's the way people misconceive what you do. People assume, especially in weeks like this when you're just so busy and you putting out a lot of analysis more than usual and doing a lot of interviews, that like that's your job. Is like, oh, something blew up, let me go analyze it. Like that's not your job at all. Your job is identifying these big kind of trends, these big, huge rumbling shifts in the tectonic plates, and then the events are sort of manifestations of those shifts. So that you're having a lot of new information, but if you've done your work, shouldn't usually be some massive shock. Um, and I like that's what I would suggest is like don't be reactive. If you're reacting to something and trying to change your portfolio because you're trade like that's stupid. You're never gonna have success doing that. No one can do that. You're gambling. That's not a way to manage your business. It's not a way to manage investments. The way to do it is to anticipate and to zoom out and think about these broader trends, you talk about, and like that's the research process that you do is really what are the big things that matter and what are the signposts around them that we put to identify, okay, is this thesis playing out or not? And you sort of set that in place and monitor it and make decisions on a longer time horizon based on that. Like that's the only thing that you can do. Otherwise, you're just in the shitstorm of media noise, and no one comes out of that except for people who sell media and clicks and content and hot takes. Uh, but that's not most of the listeners.
Yeah, I did an event. God, was that only last week in New York City? Yeah, time has no meaning. Last week in New
It
York
was 12
City,
hours ago, Jacob.
I'm in a wormhole. I'm here via Tesseract after doing an event 3 minutes ago. No, I was on this panel at this event last week, so it was last Tuesday, and so the war was sort of in its initial stages, and you can bet that everybody wanted to talk about this, and so the panel I was on was about navigating global uncertainty in a time of geopolitical risk. If I hear the phrase like navigating uncertainty one more time, I'm gonna self-immolate what is left of my hair. I might just buzz it anyway, by the way. I'm getting tired of it, but that's beside the point. I don't need to talk about my hairstyling choices on the podcast. But I decided to start off when I gave my little 5-minute spiel on the panel. I said, look, I know we're supposed to be talking about uncertainty and volatility, but instead I want to tell you the three things that I am absolutely certain of. And then we can talk about like all the crazy things that you want. But I instead want to give you things that I know. And the first thing I said was, I think we're moving towards a multipolar order. I think that this entire conflict shows us that. Like, the United States didn't want Israel to bomb Iran. Israel said, we're going to bomb anyway. The United States, like, didn't have any allies that joined it in this. There were also like Russia and China stayed on the outs, and we're going to stay on the outs. Like, this is a multipolar world. Get used to it. The upside is there's not going to be World War III, even though the media is going to sell you that. The downside is there's going to be a lot more of these type of events. So buckle up your seatbelt, and like, you're just going to have to get used to this level of volatility in markets. The second thing I said to the audience was, unless you are Iranian or Israeli or have assets in either one of those countries, maybe if you have assets in like a Qatar or a Bahrain, like maybe we could talk there. But unless you're directly exposed, or you're somebody who's trying to get out of those countries and thinking about thoughtful ways to structure your wealth and get out of those countries, this is not going to have any impact on you. So I'm not saying it's unimportant. I'm not saying don't follow it. But like, if what you're looking for is insights on how this is going to affect your life, not that much. And I know that message needs to be said because we've talked about this before in the podcast. My sister indicator went off this week. I hadn't heard from my sister from literally months, and I got a text
Your
3 days
sister.
ago.
She gets so much flack on this show.
No, it's out of a place of love. If she's asking, I know that something is really in the zeitgeist. Like, she's the one that keeps me, like, I'm up here in my scholarly pedantic, pretentious tower. And she's like, yo, dude, like, real talk. Like, is anything bad going to happen here? Like, do I need to worry about this stuff? And I was like, no, Leah, like it's fine. Like, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think you're fine. And then she goes off. Like, I wish I had her approach. I wish I could move through the world the way that she does with that lack of stress. Just like, all of this happening and like literally 9 days in, do I need to worry about this? Like that sounds like I wish I could reach that enlightened plane. So it's not shade at all. If anything, it's jealousy. Um, but point being, like I had a bunch of different like messages like that. And it wasn't like, what's this going to do to my portfolio? What does this mean for the future of the Iranian regime? And like, I had the nerds emailing me too, but like I had normal people just asking me, hey, am I okay? Like, can I travel to New York City next week? And like, is there gonna be a terrorist attack? Like, can you just like give me a gut check here? And I said, like, yeah, you're fine. Like, I know the media is not telling you that way, but like, I think you're fine. You're no more or less at risk than you would be otherwise. Like me here in downtown New Orleans in my co-working space, probably more at risk of harm than, any American city terrorist attack. And then the third thing I said, and this goes back to some of the things we've talked about this podcast, on this podcast for some time now, and goes back to our good friend Nareth, which is I'm certain that despite the fact that we're going to have all this technological innovation and artificial intelligence and robotics and all the crazy things that are happening, in a really good and positive and meaningful way. I disagree with Paul Tudor Jones. Like, I think AI and some of these things are going to change the world for the better. But no matter how much advances we have in these technologies, I'm certain that it hasn't changed our relationship with time and that we have a limited amount of it. And that one of the distressing things about this media environment and about like the uncertainty here is that it's stealing your time, it's stealing your attention. So instead of focusing on the things that matter to you or thinking about the future of your business or spending quality time with the people that you love, you've got CNN on in the background. You're taking out your phone and being, oh my God, what did Trump say next? And I think all of that is conspiring to steal time away from people. And so one of the ways I think you have to be, or one of the ways I've been trying to tell people to deal with this multipolar world and all of this insanity, and one of the ways I keep myself sane, is protect your time. And you need to erect defenses against the things that want to steal your time away. And you should have a very high threshold for what that looks like, because it's not just your job. It's literally the media that's wanting to steal your time with clicks and attention. It's literally the clickbait that is causing you to not be fully present before. So I know people don't listen to this for like me, like, giving them life advice or anything like that. But when I was speaking to that audience, it was just like, what are the three things I'm certain of? I'm certain the world is multipolar. I am certain this conflict is not going to be World War III. And I'm certain that all of this is just another way to waste time. So stop wasting time and go do something productive with your time, with your family, or with the cool technologies that are out there, or anything else. Like spend your time doing that rather than worrying about that. Um, and I don't know. I feel that way at the end of this particular war too, which I didn't get to do that because I had to spin out content. To your point, the way that I attract people to some of what we're doing is when you get this surge of interest from most people are not normally interested in the world, and then suddenly the sister index goes off. You want to make sure that you're there providing those answers so that they can ask the next follow-up question when something happens and give them an objective sense of what's going on. So like for me, it's game time. But in some ways, my ability to compartmentalize makes it easier because it's just like, okay, like now we've got a ceasefire. I'm going to put the finishing touches on a piece right here that I'm going to hit send on as soon as we get off the podcast, and then I'm going to take a day off. I think I'm going to go to the beach. So
There's I think it's in Liar's Poker where Michael Lewis is talking about when he was a young analyst, uh, and on Wall Street, and he would go to this older guy, and like there'd be big events all the time, and he'd say, "Well, should I, what should we be doing? Buying, selling this, blah 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 blah." And the older guy would just say, "It's a bull market. It's a bull market every time. It's a bull market. Just hold on." And I was thinking about that because I think that's the problem. As you say, like you have to do a lot right now because like everyone understands a big part of what you do is drawing attention to the work that you're doing elsewhere by sort of getting a little into the vortex. But it's definitely not that way in terms of actually what we do from an investment standpoint. And that doesn't make for good doesn't make for good media because I'm here every week. It's a multipolar world. Still multipolar, still happening. Yep, all signs are go, still going. What are the implications? How do you prepare for it? Like, Doesn't change that much, but that's good because that's the definition of a big trend. If we're here 5 years from now saying the same thing.
Well, and it used to be like there was a time in American history where the media played that role, where the media was the touchstone, where there were only three channels and there was a certain amount of trust that you had in the people that was telling you what was going on. And this is what I mean about protecting time. Like now things have fractured and we're part of the fractured media environment. Like we're two bros on a podcast and I'm beaming out articles on a Substack. So I'm not throwing too much shade on it. But just to say, like, you don't have those touchstones anymore. And you have all of these different sources. And now we have deep fakes and AI and bots. So it's really hard to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. But I think it is important to have those touchstones and to have those centers of gravity, whether it's your own family or whether it's the sources that you trust or the ideas that you have about the world. And it's difficult. You have to be flexible enough to change your ideas about the world as things around you change, but then also to like put a stake in the ground and be like, but no, I think this is what's happening. So when I see all these things happening in the world, like I can digest them, I can compartmentalize them. I put a little label on a box and I put them in my mental box, and then I put them on the shelf when it's time to go do something else. And I think the way our information diet is structured right now, it's not like that. It's just like constant McDonald's being intravenously beamed into our cell phones, which makes its way directly to our brains. Like the idea that we're going to have like those, the glasses and things like that are going to allow us to see the world through the AI and the computer. Like, God, shoot me. Like, I don't want anything like that. I really just want to throw out all of my devices for all those reasons. I don't know.
Well, I think in our small way, we can play that role to some extent because, like, what you just described is a media environment where there was no incentive to generate activity for the sake of activity.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, if people are looking for good sources of information, like, you don't have to listen to us, but try to replicate the incentive structure of us. Like, we have an incentive to find truth. And sometimes truth is boring. And sometimes truth is, yeah, this isn't a big deal. Don't worry about it. Like, go back, Leah, and just enjoy your day. Like, nothing to see here. And that's sort of what the incentive of the media used to be when there was no, ad monopoly and competition and stuff like that. Because these were well-educated people who had a civic duty to, kind of say it as it is and what they, all that stuff. Um, so if someone is depending on clicks for their paycheck, then be wary. But thankfully, like, I don't know, I think that's probably peaked. Like, I think there's probably more sources of good analysis of and information of people who don't have that incentive and are just doing their thing and have an incentive to find truth, like us. I don't know. Maybe that's super rose tinted glasses, but
I don't know. It's really hard. I think it's hard because our phones are so embedded in our daily lives, and even if you want that, like your phone is constantly pinging you, whether it's with emails or social media or things like that. And even somebody like me who like is actively fighting against this in my life, sometimes I find myself just staring at my phone, and I'm like, what am I doing right now? Like I've already checked this inbox like 10 times today. I need to check it again. I like can't be sitting here in this moment like thinking about something else. It's like, yeah, it's there's something about the ease of having it there that makes it difficult.
you need a Jacob. I don't check my phone. Like, I barely kept up on what's going on in the last week because I know if there's anything that I
Well, yeah,
really
well,
needed to know, that you would let me know.
yeah, I need a Jake. Okay, well, I'm just going to send all of my articles to ChatGPT, and once AI gets big enough, like I'll just have AI replace me, and I'll no longer be here doing my thing. So, all right. Well, anything else you want to tell the listeners, Rob, before we get out of here?
No, go enjoy your week. Everything is okay.
Sounds good. Cheers. Thank you so much for listening to the Jacob Shapiro podcast. The show is produced and edited by Jacob Smulian, and it's in many ways the Jacob Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, or leave a review. It takes just a couple seconds of your time, but it really helps us. Also share with a friend. If you're interested in learning more about hiring me to speak at your event, or if you want to learn more about the wealth management services that I offer through Bespoke or at Cognitive Investments, you can find more information at jacobshapiro.com. You can also write to me directly at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I'm also on X for now with the handle Jacob Shap. That's Jacob SHAP, no dats, dashes, or anything else, but I'm not hard to find. See you out there.